There's obviously a lot of debate around just looking at the individual and the human factor. Is AI there to take the job, or is it to make the person in the job, more effective? And where a lot of folks come down and settle on that is you may not be at risk of losing your job due to AI, but you're at risk of losing your job to the person who knows how to use AI. I think there are very clearly tasks that are done manually today that will not be done by people, and it's not so long it's already happening. So there will need to be a reskilling and redeployment and redevelopment of the workforce. And it's not something that's going to happen organically unless you're sitting down and actually putting these use cases in the hands of your team.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast, where we explore critical trends and strategies shaping risk, security, and leadership today. I am your host, Boris Agranovich, founder and CEO at Global Risk Community, and our guest today is Jim Wetekamp, the CEO of Riskonnect, which is a global leader in integrated risk management technology. Jim is well known to our regular listeners, as we had a few conversations with him about when it was COVID, actually one of our first podcasts that went well, and we decided to continue with this amazing technology. And today, Jim, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast again.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be back.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So I believe that we will have very thoughtful conversation on the topic of involving risk landscape, shaping the future of risk management, knowledge gap, and perhaps aging workforce. But before that, Jim, could you remind our listeners a short story about yourself, your career path, and how you guys at Riskonnect help companies manage risk?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm CEO of Riskonnect. We're an integrated risk management platform, and what we focus on is helping organizations see, understand, and act on risk across the enterprise. So the kind of our key theme for us is bringing risk under one roof. So that's kind of combining the realms of insurable risk, GRC and compliance, and business continuity and resilience together so that organizations can make better decisions, so they can see more about their blind spots and then act more in an orchestrated fashion in terms of how they mitigate risks. I've been here for about 8 years now. Pretty close to, and seeing us grow.
You and I spoke a few years ago, and since then, what have been the changes in your work environment? What you can tell us since our last discussion?
I think for the organizations we work with, the role of risk leaders has changed a tremendous amount, over the time since you and I first spoke, and that's in response to the fact that I think we organizationally think of risk less as episodic or more event oriented, more as being kind of ambient or ever present. And so risk leaders have had to kind of evolve from, more kind of checkbox assessment, reflective, to more proactive, more resilience oriented, and more performance oriented in terms of their integration to the strategy of the organization. So with all of those things comes a lot of change for those folks. And one of the biggest things is all of this accountability without responsibility, right? The risk function has a lot of pressure on it to help the organization succeed, but doesn't actually own the resources where risk exists. And so there's been so much change on the tools and technology to support them. And, one of the most obvious things in the past 18, 24 months has been the evolution of AI to help with that decision making, efficiency, et cetera, and help get their hands around the problem more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the big themes shaping the future of risk management is the perhaps aging workforce. Many of the professionals hold institutional knowledge. So, how should organization prepare for the knowledge gap? Because more experienced people will retire, and some models perhaps will be kind of on untenable or something like this.
There's a few obvious things that I think a lot of organizations naturally do in what they're doing to combat this problem. They're investing in documentation. They're looking at trying to build new and younger resources through mentorship programs and build digital knowledge bases. Like there's all these kinds of of elements. But I think within risk specifically, it's kind of manifesting very rapidly. You kind of have this average moving workforce without the number of folks graduating into risk specific degrees or roles in the same way they did before. And that demographic shift then means you've got to change the way you think about how the risk function operates. And I think the result of that is a good thing in the form that it's pushing risk to kind of merge that front line and second line a bit more and become more operational and business oriented. I think you see more folks coming into risk from business rather than into risk from risk. And I think that actually strengthens how the risk function helps and supports the organization. So in terms of the way you think about talent development is a change, where the sources of those talent are, how they grow inside the organization, what your expectation is from a skill standpoint, more digitally oriented, more analytical, and more industrial and operational in terms of their understanding of how the business does what it does. In parallel, the technology to support those functions has a huge responsibility in this because higher automation, more inherent AI knowledge bases, the more touchless an activity can become, the less dependent I am upon perhaps some of that inherent knowledge or experience that's exiting the organization, because the more instilled in the actual software and the content driving the software it becomes. So it's kind of in one form, changing the way you onboard and enable the organization where you source that talent. And another, it's on us as the vendors in the space, building the technologies to help codify and reduce that reliance on individual memory and make it more of an asset of the organization that's integrated into the workflow in the way that the organization manages risk.
All right, awesome. So you mentioned that AI is moving fast, and more than half of companies are already using, planning to use it in risk management. But on the flip side, what risk should the leaders be most aware of when it comes to relying on AI in risk management? Is there a danger in rushing kind of adoption before the data governance or process are ready?
I think what a lot of folks are discovering very rapidly now as use cases are expanding, is that the kind of old adage of garbage in and garbage out still adheres in this area. And one of the risks is moving too fast without the right data, right governance, and right processes on top of AI. So, like a poorly implemented AI, it's just going to allow you to amplify your errors, make mistakes more rapidly, create new blind spots, expose organization risk in a different way. So starting with clear use cases, ensuring data quality, kind of documenting your expectations, and making sure you still have the human in the loop, the person taking the key decision, are all facets of responsible AI inside of the risk management process. So, there's a huge drive on this. It's changing organizations already today. The future is already here. We're offering technologies that allow for predictive insights. We're giving folks access to technologies that are generating and giving guidance on their next best activity to do, and then agentic elements that are actually automating tasks. So they're not missing out on the efficiency, but making sure that you have the same level of accuracy, the same level of strategic decision making, and that those insights are driving better decision making is a key element or risk to kind of focus on at the start of this journey.
Mhm. And looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest blind spots or overlooked risks that the organization should be paying closer attention to it when the next in the next maybe 3 or 5 years?
I think one of the things which is difficult, it's back to that kind of idea around risk being ambient, kind of ever present, kind of always evolving, is, there's this desire to look at horizon scanning. And that's an important facet, and look around the corner and look for these big moving, junctures of risk. But it's actually in this moment a little bit bigger of blind spot is the death by a thousand cuts. When you think about the pressures on a global organization today where you have areas of the economy that are struggling, areas of regulatory change that are changing daily in terms of international trade policy or local regulation, talent and cultural and geopolitical issues kind of manifesting. It can cause organizations in pockets to start to try to lean down on resources, to shrink investments in areas that had historically managed risk. It could be a safety precaution. It could be a checkbox activity on a compliance to make sure that you're following trade regulation. Like all these kind of little pieces that you can't look at specifically and see, but as you kind of look at the correlation and the combinatorial risks, become a big problem over time. And the way that comes through is it'll show up in the form of a fragmented or broken supply chain or like a hidden dependency that you didn't know about that all of a sudden manifests, somewhere deep in another tier of your supply chain because of a geopolitical choke point where you had vendor concentration risk, right? Like it wasn't just one thing that caused it. And it's the same thing with climate. There's a lot of attention on climate and large interruptive events and the increase in tropical storms and hurricanes and things like that. It's not just the physical disruption, though, of that plant. It's the transition liability and where you're kind of moving your assets and the fact that there's trade regulation now that might limit where you might shift, supply. And there's actual asset scarcity in some reason, in locations around water or energy, et cetera. So there's just these pieces
Mhm.
that organizations need to get a lot better at putting together and looking at those correlations in order to make better decisions. There are other kind of emerging back to the technology side related to AI. AI and digital trust is a huge risk that's accelerating for organizations. It's manifesting in cyber risk and deepfake and frauder and insider risk and AI dependency risk. If I put all of my knowledge and all of my decision making into this asset, and then this asset isn't available because it is technology, and I no longer have the resources that actually know how to do the task, I'm stuck. So what's the redundancy plan? What's the failover plan? What's the resilience
Mhm.
plan as I become increasingly dependent upon these technologies? And so those are some of the things that I think we spend a lot of time talking about in the context of the earlier subject we were chatting about, which is that kind of workforce skills convergence, right? In this
Mhm.
risk tech gap, talent gap, which I think people are climbing and spanning very, very rapidly. But you've got to get the risk function into a center of excellence mindset around data mining, analytics, utilization of modeling and scenario planning, because you can't cover all of these things manually. It's impossible.
Yeah, fantastic. So a lot of choices. So, Jim, I would like to ask you a personal point of view. So, what is a major misconception in this field of making when it goes to about application of AI and risk management that you kind of strongly disagree with?
Oh, something around on the idea. There's obviously a lot of debate around just looking at the individual and the human factor. Is AI there to take the job, or is it to make the person in the job, more effective? And where a lot of folks come down and settle on that is you may not be at risk of losing your job due to AI, but you're at risk of losing your job to the person who knows how to use AI. I think there are very clearly tasks that are done manually today that will not be done by people, and it's not so long, it's already happening. So there will need to be a reskilling and redeployment and redevelopment of the workforce. And it's not something that's going to happen organically unless you're sitting down and actually putting these use cases in the hands of your team, driving them through, documenting the value of them. Trial and error is a huge factor right now. And you read these articles right now about some statistic, I think I read the other day, 95% of AI pilots fail. They should right now. You should be trying everything. So it should be a volume game. I should be trying 1,000 things, and sure, only 95% fail and only a 5% success rate. But if that 5% is driving material efficiency and outcome, It's worth that trial and error at this point as we adjust the way we work. And if we don't, I think you're just leaving a terrific asset on the table. So I would embrace, I guess the short version of that is I would embrace the trial and error and lean into the failure of the pilots because I think the success you're going to see out of the back end of that on trying different things with your stakeholders in the organization across the first line and second line, working with your vendor and supply chain, only positives are going to come out of this.
All right, fantastic. So let's summarize because we heard a lot of positive things about your kind of feeling that we need to experiment a lot. But if we summarize, if someone who's listening to this episode would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
I think if one or two takeaways, you're sitting in a moment where you have hidden risk of incremental erosion, right? Cumulative strain versus headline events. And a headline event will come every once in a while. But that cumulative strain, I think, is the bigger, deeper risk that's kind of coming up to organizations. And small compromises, stretch budgets, deferred maintenance, minor control exceptions, all these little pieces. And it's building systematic fragility. So that's kind of headline number one. Headline number two is there is an answer amidst change in your workforce and what seems like depleting and aging talent. There's an opportunity to harvest new talent, new experience, more technical resources, more operationally minded approaches to harness the rapidly evolving technology that's being produced to help solve this problem in this moment. I'd encourage people to try it and really drive and looking at that. And the last piece of that, I think, is the important part about that is picking those pilots or those areas of opportunity. They're strategic in nature. Risks opportunity now is more around how I enable the performance of the organization, drive its growth, maintain its profitability, and less how do I pass this audit, this compliance regulation. That's a piece, that's a facet, but that's not the end goal. So I think if you kind of take those three things in mind, cumulative strain and overall resilience, how do I tackle that? Embracing this automation, what's happening with AI, and doing it with the KPIs of the organization in mind. How do I drive better profitability, better growth, better talent management, et cetera? I think you'll see the risk function continue to stay relevant and drive tremendous impact for their organizations.
Awesome, awesome. So, Jim, thank you very much. That's why all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something that you feel is important to our audience, please go ahead.
I'd just say risk management's at a crossroads, I think, based upon, how these things are evolving. And I'd encourage folks to embrace innovation and collaboration, and that's going to help their organizations thrive in uncertainty for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That was my pleasure again. And I wish you and your company, Riskonnect, a great success. Hope we will see you guys. I think last time I saw you in the Risk Sharp event in London. And hope this year we see you again. Bye
You
bye.
as well, Boris. Thanks much.